Hello friends, my name is Phil and welcome back to PG Prototypes. It's been a while since I've posted just because work has been quite rough. In the architectural industry, this last bit of the year is really tough for us because we've got to get a lot of work out before we close, and then we close for a full month. It sounds great on paper, but it really isn't that fun. So a lot of late nights, a lot of hard work, a lot of weekends working meant that I didn't really have a lot of time for trains. But I have managed to work on the layout a bit, and I've pieced together a bunch of clips of the things that I've done. So in today's episode, I'm going to show you how I made some changes to poor running sections on the layout. I'm going to mount the buildings to the baseboard, and I'm going to start, I suppose, detailing McGilvery engineering. So I hope you enjoy what I have for you today, and I'm very excited to have a video going out again. As passionate as I am about my trains, I don't actually get that much time to run them. We had a lot of rain over the past weekend, so I figured it would be a good opportunity to bring the layout into the house for a running session as I had intended when I originally designed this layout. I started by testing out my note panel, and I wrote out everything that I had planned for this operating session. The layout hasn't run in a few weeks, so the first order of business was to test all the track and clean whatever was dirty. I wrote out all the rolling stock numbers and allocated a siding to each one. So McGilvery A3 is the larger building, the third loading door. McGilvery B is the loading platform, and McGilvery C is the coal store. So there's nothing too complicated here. Maybe I'll change it in future, but it works for today's episode. You'll also notice that I made a note that I changed CV 3 and 4, the momentum CVs, to 0. This is just to make the track testing a little bit easier. Dirty track and momentum don't really play well together. So I'm using my O3 to run over every single part of the track here, and I'm cleaning as I go along. As I mentioned, I haven't run trains on the layout in ages, so it really does need a good clean. Everything ran pretty smoothly until I got to the two McGilvery sidings. I really battled for a good chunk of time to get them to run properly, but I just kept getting really erratic results as I ran the loco backwards and forward through the sidings. That footage was shot about a month ago at least. And what had transpired was the moisture in the air from all the rain had made the triplex card swell enough to lift the locos off the track. And I couldn't really fix that. None of my locos worked. So I had to make a pretty big decision. Do I try and fix that problem, replace the triplex with something else, or do I tear it all up and try a different solution? And I chose the latter. I've never had a problem tearing a layout up that doesn't work. That doesn't faze me at all. I just want my trains to run well so that I can enjoy them during an operating session. So what I decided to do was lift all that card, cut it away from the edge of the track, make sure that there was no card in place that could affect the running of trains. And after I'd completed that, I continued my running session and checked if my locos ran, and they ran very well. So I'm going to show you the rest of the running session, and then I'm going to move on to fixing the damage that was done. With all the dirty work done, I decided to finish my running session, as this would allow me to test the sidings that had been adjusted. I adjusted CV 3 and 4 back to a value of 8 so that I could make sure everything ran well with the DCC momentum. W126901 was delivered safe and sound, so it was on to the next boxcar. B98836 goes to the platform at McGilvery Engineering to be loaded with some outbound tools and parts. Finally, B55532 gets dropped off at the coal store for unloading, and yes, I'm aware there is no load in the wagon, but for now I'm just pretending. with the layout back in the workshop, I got stuck into fixing the scenery on these two sidings. Something that had bugged me before was the length of the platform siding, so I used this opportunity to cut it down to a size that was more in line with what I wanted. Next, I moved on to covering up the removed paving, so I chose to make use of the previous track inserts because I really like the way that these parts look. They wouldn't be functional in reality, but I'm using some creative license here. I used the same technique I used before to add ballast to the tracks, and I added my PVA water glue mix to set everything in place. Here are the two sidings blended into the rest of the ballast work. It didn't feel great breaking up my previous work, but I am much happier with this configuration. The paving looked good before, but I feel this looks closer to what I had in mind when I first started this project. The most important thing is that the locomotives run better on this configuration. And whilst I was already making changes, I decided that it wouldn't be the worst idea to change another aspect that I wasn't happy with, which was the coal offloading siding. I feel this option also just works a lot better. Even if I don't run my layout, I still look at it a heck of a lot. And something that just didn't sit right with my eye was the lack of a heavy loading facility for McGilvery engineering. I had a gantry crane from my previous layout, so I tested it out on what I felt was a suitable spot on the building. Some adjustments need to be made, but I suppose that's all part of the fun. I carefully removed the existing window and door, and I got stuck into cutting out the brickwork between the two openings. My plan is to create one large opening with a tall double door, and that double door will have a small opening on top to allow the gantry rail to enter the building. Next, I chopped the existing gantry crane down to fit the building. I glued it in place and I was really happy with it so far. Later on, I actually adjusted it again to not have the mounting point on the exterior of the building, as this made no sense because the gantry rail would not be able to enter the building in reality. I made a door that matched the existing doors and I fitted it in place. I was really happy with how this turned out. With all the changes complete, I got back to detailing the rest of the layout. Before I added scenery details, I wanted to make sure that the buildings wouldn't move, so I secured them to the layout with these mounting brackets that I cut on the laser cutter. I want to be able to remove the buildings in future, so this temporary fixing method works really well. With the brackets secured to the interior walls, I marked the hole locations and drilled a small pilot hole for the screws that would hold the buildings in place. The buildings were returned to their positions and I screwed them down onto the baseboard. Because of how the roof was mounted on this building, I was unable to remove it, so I made some exterior mounting brackets to secure it to the baseboard. Obviously, this doesn't look very good, so the solution was to make some detailed parts that could hide these fixing points. I came up with a simple storage box and a shed that I could just blue tack in place. It looks like the layout is mostly going to live in my workshop, so the back isn't going to be visible very often. I still want a bit of detailing here, so I made a waste bin that I filled with offcuts from my laser cutter. I'll cover the paint technique later in the video. Back to the front of the layout, and I'm using 3D printed crates from my previous layout to detail an open spot next to the coal store. I figured these are just some old crates from a previous delivery that needed to be stored somewhere until they could be hauled away. Where possible, I try to salvage detail parts that I have from previous layouts, or even parts that I have stored for no real good reason. I'm trying my best to clear out clutter in the workshop, and this is a great way to add small details to the layout. I had designed and printed all these parts for my previous harbor layout. I try to make all my models available on Thingiverse for free, as you've seen in my previous videos, and I'll leave a link in the description for anyone that is interested in trying them out themselves. As I'm editing this video, I have noticed that there are some small sacks on some of the pallets. I make these out of cheap modeling clay, and I'm never totally sure on which content to include. So if anyone out there would like to see the process, please just mention it in the comments and I'll make a video showing the process. I'm really happy with the vehicles that I designed for this layout, and I feel this little forklift has so much character. The driver is enjoying his lunch whilst catching up on the latest news and football scores on his radio. As I mentioned before, the link to the 3D files is in the description. Industrial buildings are generally not the cleanest places, and I felt the scene needed something to display this. I decided to make a scrap heap on the other side of the coal store, and it'll be a nice detailing exercise. It also adds another option for operation in that an empty hopper could be shunted into the siding to collect some scrap periodically. As with the scrap bin I showed earlier, I'm using offcuts out of my laser cutter. I initially started gluing them down, but I soon realized that the better option was to just mix them all up with PVA glue and scoop them out into position. I've mentioned it in previous videos, but with things like this, it's all about texture. The more random textures, the easier it will be to dry brush later on. And I want loads of raised parts for dry brushing and loads of recesses to add shadow. And I'm going to mention it again, it's all about layering here. The glue needs some time to dry until it goes clear, and then I hit it with some Vallejo black gray in the airbrush. I'm really liberal with the coat as it needs to get into all the nooks and crannies. Before I can continue with the detailing on the scrap pile, I need the paint to dry fully, so I moved on to installing a small coal store in front of the boiler house. I designed and printed a medium-sized front-end loader for the layout. I missed the mark on the traditional coal staves as mentioned in a comment in an earlier video, so my solution is to have the front-end loader move coal around the factory complex as needed. I like the idea of the loader being used around the factory for multiple jobs like moving scrap or heavy lifting. The coal needs to be manually shoveled and taken to the boiler, so I'm adding 2 figures to complete this task. This is a much better fit than my previous idea of a coal pit mechanically feeding the boiler, which seems to be a much bigger industrial operation. It was also mentioned in a previous comment that this wouldn't have been used in this era, so it's much better all round for this particular layout. Back to the scrap heap, and I'm using silver acrylic to dry brush all the raised edges. The layering technique I always mention is important here. I have a black base for shadow, and now I have light edges on all the raised parts. When I add the weathering colors in the next step, the silver will peek through, giving the impression of old metal that has been left out in the elements. Next, I'm adding a thick wash of Vallejo US Flat Earth for my rust base coat. I'm applying it randomly, but I try to add it in streaks where I can to simulate water movement. I'm doing the same thing with Vallejo Yellow Ochre, and this more yellow color shows a later stage of erosion on the scrap heap. I've mixed some Vallejo dark red ochre pigment powder with water, and I'm layering it over the scrap heap. When it dries, the color will soften significantly and it'll have a powdered rust consistency. Lastly, I'm going to do the same thing as the previous step, but I'm going to use burnt umber pigment powder. And the trick to this type of layering is to blend all the colors together as you add each new layer. And when it dries, you get a more natural look to your color blending. Let's take a look at how the detailing is going so far. I wanted to have some more material detail, so I made this stack of steel strips that would have been delivered to the siding. I cut some strips out of triplex card and added spaces between the layers. They've been painted with grey primer, then black acrylic, and finally dry brushed with silver acrylic. Another 3D printed crate, and I felt the space had been filled quite nicely. I feel the exterior of the buildings is still very bare, so my first solution is to add some exterior shelving for material storage. I made this one out of 1mm triplex card and it got the same paint treatment as the steel strips. I just added a little bit of rust for some extra detail. And what better an opportunity to add another small forklift to complete another scene. Model railroading is a multifaceted hobby. There are so many aspects we can look at. There is a track laying aspect, an electronics aspect, a woodworking aspect, scenery, operations. There are so many different things that we can look at. And I feel that we need to choose which ones we're going to focus on. It's not that you can't do all of them, but generally speaking, time or budget are going to become a factor at some point in time, and you're going to need to choose the ones that you focus on. So for today's episode, I encountered an issue with track, with running my locos in these two sidings, and I made the choice to change those sidings. I could have very easily chosen to try and fix that problem and make it work so that the scenery stayed the same. But the choice that I made was that I would prefer to continue with the layout and do more by changing those two sidings. It'll be a lot easier to run in future, a lot easier to clean track. That was my choice. And sometimes I believe that people don't make choices. They don't choose a direction that they're going to go in. And it can lead to a lot of misery when running trains. If you put your train on the track and it doesn't run correctly, you're going to be less likely to run your trains. So I think that it's a good thing to practice this type of approach to model railroading, where we make changes when we need those changes. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's something that I think about a lot. I mention it throughout all my videos.
it just seems to be a hobby where there's a lot of judgment, weird judgment, and I just don't think that that's productive. So what I hope I was able to show in this episode is that it's okay to change. It's okay to put a lot of love and effort and planning and design and all these things into your layout, make a mistake, and then change. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that it's a good practice. As usual, I want to give a huge thank you to all of you that have chosen to like and subscribe. I really, really appreciate it. Unfortunately, the nature of YouTube is that this is how the algorithm works. It's likes, subscriptions, views, this type of thing. And every like, every subscribe goes a long way in helping promote the video. And I would like to keep the channel going a bit longer. So I do appreciate all of you. I appreciate all of your support. I hope you get value out of these videos. If you haven't liked or subscribed, please consider doing so. It would mean a lot. But as usual, I always say it, if you don't feel the need to do it, just don't do it. You can just watch the videos and enjoy. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'm going to try and finish this layout before the end of the year and get another video out within the next 2 weeks, but we'll see how that one pans out. I can't promise anything. But again, a huge thank you, and until next time, keep on training.